What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video today we're going to be discussing armor penetration, specifically when it comes to weapons in Helldivers 2 and how this affects your choices with what to bring into a deployment. Now this isn't just going to be about the railgun, but I couldn't call this video the problems with armor penetration in Helldivers 2 and how I think they can fix it, because that's far too much for any thumbnail or title. So I just went with the railgun. Nonetheless, the TLDR version of this video is that the armor penetration system in Helldivers 2 is a little bit confusing. It doesn't really work the way that it's supposed to work, I would say, in terms of like indicating to you what your choices of weapons should be, and therefore probably needs some tweaks and some changes from the developers to make the system work a little bit better. Let's go. So before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of the problem with armor penetration, let's first look and see exactly how it is explained by the CEO and the creative director of Arrowhead, Palstead, on Twitter. Basically, when asked the question, I'll just throw it up on the screen here. So Navek Sarah asked, I guess my real question is what defines armor pen? The Senator has light armor pen like most weapons, but punches through hive guard armor like paper, while other weapons bounce off. Just wondering is all. I love all the weapons and have most unlocked. Liberate the gang, rise up. So now Palstead comes back and says armor pen is a value between 0 and 10. If the armor pen is equal to the enemy's armor value, so let's just call that AV from now on, the damage is 50%. If the AP beats the armor, you do 100%. If AP is less than the armor value, the bullet ricochets off. I don't know what light AP condition is. I think it might be if AP is 2 or less, but honestly, I don't know either. So maybe that's already indicative of, I think, a further problem, and that is exactly what does light armor penetration and medium armor penetration mean in the game. But overall, the system here is fairly easy to understand, and that is that each enemy creature, each enemy inside the game has a specific armor value. Your gun has a armor penetration value. Literally everything has armor. I would say the smallest enemies probably have an AV of 0 or 1, but they still kind of have an armor value. And then some of the tougher enemies obviously have higher, and your gun needs to at the very least be even to that number to even just hit that armor and do 50% damage. Otherwise, if you are less than that amount, then it will bounce off, and if you are more than that amount, you will do full damage. At this point in time, it makes absolute sense to bring the railgun into the discussion, because up until the first week in March, this weapon was essentially a crutch slash Swiss Army knife for players to be able to deal with some of the more difficult enemies, aka difficult content in the game. That is because even though a uncharged railgun had very limited damage that it was actually dealing, it had an extremely high armor penetration value, which meant that you could use this weapon to kill some of the more difficult enemies, albeit with 4 to 6, 7, 8, whatever shots in whichever position you're hitting them on. Nonetheless, you were penetrating armor, so you were making progress and you were chipping away at that life. And the first week in March, this was changed. Some weapons were, let's say, patched and fixed and nerfed. And in this case, the railgun's armor penetration value was lowered, thereby making it not as powerful as it was before and not as easy to use as it was before. And boy, oh boy, did their Reddit and their Twitter and their Discord take a beating for this. At this point in time, players started scrambling and looking for a different solution to some of these enemies, like charges, which can be really difficult to deal with if you don't have the right weapon. Only to realize that because of this armor penetration system, a lot of the weapons in the game are actually very ineffective at dealing with these enemy types, these enemies with extremely high armor values. Now, this is probably by design. At the very least, it has been indicated by several, people on the developing side of Helldivers that the idea is actually that it's through a combination of, hitting the enemy at the right side, from the right side, teamwork, and also stratagems that these bigger enemies should be dealt with, and that it shouldn't be the case if you're just deploying onto an, planet with one gun that can fucking kill everything, and that over time you can just work your way from one side of the map to the other side. I think it's also at this point in time worth mentioning that I think a lot of people play this game with the mindset of deploy and start fucking fighting from one side of the map to the other side, killing everything, which again, by design, the game is not meant that way. It is even explained to you in the tutorial and in the help messages in the game that the idea for deployment is fast in, fast out, get the objective and fucking get out before you get overwhelmed, since the longer you spend on a planet, the more danger there is that there's just going to be too many enemies to deal with. The reality is, other than the railgun, which has now basically been rendered very un-railgun-like, you have to turn to something like the flamethrower, which is ridiculously good and actually did get a buff as well, or some of the other, I would say, lesser known weapons like the MG42, which most people got kind of like for free right at the beginning, and is really good at dealing with medium armor. Not a charger though per se, but definitely some of the other enemies. But the bottom line is we don't have this Swiss Army knife in the railgun anymore. So what can be done to fix this issue? Well, first and foremost, I think it's important that the armor penetration system perhaps be communicated a little bit better. Having this message saying like light armor penetration, medium armor penetration, and even those being in a range is perhaps not the best way to indicate to the people which weapons can do what. I think again this might actually be by design, and furthermore, if you really get into the rabbit hole here, might be another reason why the railgun was actually nerfed, and that is because I think that the developers want players to experiment with weapons. They want players to not necessarily look at a weapon and go, oh, okay, I know everything there is to know about this weapon and therefore I've already made a decision, fuck it, I'm not going to try it. They want players to take the shit on a deployment with them, try it out and say, it's not that bad against this kind of enemy. Okay, it's not that great against this one, but the point is they want experimentation. And with the railgun, there was no experimentation. I had tons of friends who started playing this game after like let's say the beginning rush, and so they could simply turn to videos, turn to the internet, turn to me and ask, hey dude, what should I be unlocking first? And always the answer was, dude, get yourself the shield backpack, get yourself the railgun, fuck everything else, and that's it. I cannot explain the amount of times that my deployments at Helldive was the cookie cutter, shield backpack, railgun, 500 kg orbital laser. That's all you needed, and you could do every single piece of content in the game. Now, I enjoyed that, don't get me wrong, but the point is I get that from a design perspective, this severely pigeonholes like the way that you play the game, and therefore essentially becomes like the easiest style to play the game, which means that the most players will flock to that style, and therefore it renders a lot of the other stuff that they've developed for the game moot. I think rather than having the armor penetration value be displayed on every single weapon, thereby kind of like dissuading players from picking them, I think it should be rather worked into the damage calculation of every single weapon. Thereby, what I'm saying, and by the way, let me preface this by also saying that I am not a developer. I don't know how difficult or how easy it would be to change the system and bring it in. I could be asking for something which is nigh impossible to do, but I think that the armor penetration should be worked into the damage calculation of every single shot. And every weapon has a armor penetration value, which can then be sort of like the strength of that. So something with an armor penetration value of 1 is like, for argument's sake, 5% armor penetration, and something with a value of 10 is 100% armor penetration. And this adds an additional multiplier onto the damage that you deal to enemies. This means that given the right set of circumstances and the right amount of bullets and the right amount of time, that you could use a weaker weapon to whittle down an enemy even though you are shooting them on their armor. Kind of like the idea being that over time that armor sort of like weakens. This would eliminate a situation where any weapon for real bounces off the armor of enemies, and perhaps also make a lot more guns viable, since players will be like, yeah dude, I know that the machine gun doesn't deal as much damage, but I like the fact that it shoots really fast and I can fucking just sling lead out, and eventually if I spend like 2 or 3 or 4 clips, I can actually kill a charger with it even though I'm hitting it from the front. Now, that being said, that might also be a terrible idea. So let me know in the comments down below how you would change the system. Are you happy with the way it works in Helldivers 2 right now? Do you think it's simply a case of get good, scrub, and people just need to learn to play? Or how would you change the system, and how would you make some of these weapons better? How would you make armor penetration work better in the game? This is a highly reactive developer that works on, Arrowhead working on Helldivers 2, and they are very plugged into the community. The Discord, their, Reddit, and their Twitter is alive with, people offering up suggestions, them themselves also asking advice. So it's entirely possible that this system can change and go in a different direction. And nonetheless, I'm going to be playing the game. It's still one of my favorite games so far this year, maybe even, for the last couple of years, having a ton of fun with it still. And I'm excited to see the more stuff that they add to it. We have some new weapons coming in this coming week. And we just had the mech drop over the weekend, which was pretty awesome. I want to quickly also use this opportunity to give 2 things a shout out. First of all, the Discord. There's an invite in the description of this video to a Discord with players of all kinds of games on there. There's a dedicated section for Helldivers 2. If you're looking for fellow Helldivers to jump into the game with you, that is a fantastic place to find some. I also want to give the streams a shout out. So I stream exclusively on Kick every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the evenings. I play a whole bunch of different games. At the moment right now, Helldivers 2 gets played a lot. I play with members of the audience. If you want to hang out with a bunch of cool people and your boy, that is the place to go, and we'd love to have you. Other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Until next video, fucking cheers.